My family kicked me out for buying a $900 junk house instead of funding my sister's retreat. But I didn't expect they'd come knocking asking for a key, not just to the door, but to the story they once tried to erase. My name is Sofia Vergara. I'm 42 years old, a former humanities lecturer who left academia 2 years ago when the department I helped build was quietly restructured without my input. I had given them 14 years, dozens of published essays, and a student mentorship program I built from scratch. But titles mean nothing when you stop being useful. I didn't fight it. I signed the papers, packed up my nameplate, and told myself I'd rest a few months before figuring out what's next. I moved to Flagstaff, Arizona, where the air was thinner but strangely easier to breathe. I rented a guest room from a retired couple who left me alone and asked no questions for the first time in years. My name wasn't tied to any meeting calendar. My family thought it was a phase, that I'd come back to my senses and beg the department chair for a reinstatement. They kept sending links to job listings at universities across the state. I ignored them. Then came Camilla's retreat. That's what they called it. Camilla, my younger sister, had recently finished some holistic wellness certification online and was planning a multi-day transformation event in Sedona. Mom said it would be a sanctuary for women in burnout, as if burnout was something Camilla had ever truly known. She had never worked a full-time job for more than a year, yet somehow always had just enough money to rebrand. Last year, it was crystal therapy. The year before that, organic tea pop-ups. Every time it failed, the family rallied around her like she was a misunderstood genius. They invited me to dinner at my parents' house in Tempe. I hadn't been there in almost a year. It was supposed to be a casual Sunday meal, just the four of us. Mom made roast chicken, overcooked as always. Dad poured the same grocery store wine he thought passed for vintage. Camilla floated in 20 minutes late wearing a silk kimono and speaking in breathy sentences about sacred silence and lunar alignment. I sat quietly, cutting my chicken into smaller and smaller pieces, wondering how long I had to stay before it was polite to leave. Then, between bites of asparagus, Mom looked at me with that tone she reserves for manipulation dressed as concern. Camilla's retreat needs a little push, she said, just to secure the venue and speakers. We thought you might want to support her. I nodded slowly and placed my fork down. I already used my savings, I said. Camilla paused mid-sip, tilted her head like I'd spoken a foreign language, on what I took a breath. A house, I said, in Flagstaff. It's a fixer, but it's mine. For a second, no one moved. Then Dad set his glass down with more force than necessary. Camilla laughed lightly, like I had told a joke at her expense. You bought a junk house instead of helping me uplift women, she said, half smiling. Wow, classic Sophia. I didn't respond. Mom shook her head once. Slow and sharp. You always choose struggle, she said. And then you wonder why you feel isolated. I opened my mouth to speak, but Dad raised his hand like he was dismissing a student. If you want to live on your own terms, then do so fully. No calls, no help, no expectations. I left without dessert. The next morning, I was removed from the family group chat. The birthday calendar disappeared from my phone. Even the shared Spotify playlist we built one Christmas was deleted. Back in Flagstaff, I sat in my newly purchased $900 home, a collapsed porch, cracked windows, and a fridge that hummed like a warning. I sat on the only chair I owned and read the message from Mom again. Don't come for Thanksgiving. We need peace. I looked out the window at the peeling fence, the broken mailbox, the weeds that had started reclaiming the front steps. And still, it was mine. Every rusted nail, every warped floorboard, every sliver of space. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like exile. But there was a quiet clarity to it. Because the hardest part wasn't the house, the silence, or even the erasure. The hardest part was realizing they weren't trying to punish me. They believed I deserved it. And that realization was the beginning of everything else. The house creaked like it had been waiting for someone to walk across it again. Every step sounded like a question I hadn't answered yet. I slept on a borrowed futon in the middle of the living room, surrounded by boxes I hadn't unpacked, half-finished thoughts, and the smell of damp wood that never quite went away. Most mornings, I woke up before the sun, brewed coffee on a tiny electric burner, and sat by the cracked window, watching the sky shift colors while my fingers hovered above the keyboard. I told myself I would write. I always said I would, but I rarely did. Words used to come easily when they were for students or panels or peer-reviewed journals. But writing for myself was like looking into a mirror too long. It made you notice all the pieces you hadn't fixed. A week passed, then 2. The phone didn't ring. No one asked how the roof held up during the first night of rain. Camilla posted daily updates from the retreat prep soft focus photos of desert trails, herbal infusions, and abstract captions about realigning with truth. She didn't mention me, but the message was clear. Her world was flourishing. Mine had rusted. I should have felt bitter. Instead, I felt nothing, like watching someone else's show with the volume turned off. Then came the knock, not from family, not yet. It was the mail carrier, an older woman named Marlene, who wore turquoise rings and called me darlin', even when I looked like I hadn't slept in days. She handed me a letter with the HOA logo stamped in bold across the front. I hadn't even remembered this neighborhood had an HOA. Inside was a polite but firm notice about visible structural neglect, yard maintenance, and a line that stuck like a thorn. Several neighbors have raised concerns about the impact on property value. I folded the letter and stared at the front lawn, or what was left of it. Thistles, broken fencing, and a rusted mailbox that leaned forward like it was trying to escape. I wasn't offended. I was just tired. And somewhere in that exhaustion, something shifted. I didn't have money for contractors, but I had time. I pulled on the old hoodie I used for yard work, grabbed the gloves I bought on discount 3 years ago, and started pulling weeds. One by one, hours passed, then days. I watched YouTube videos on gutter replacement, patched drywall with donated supplies, bartered writing services for a secondhand sink. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't fast. But it was mine. The work steadied me. The silence, which once felt like exile, started to feel like space. And then came the text. Camilla, 10:32 p.m., no greeting, just spa pipe burst. Emergency. Can I crash for a few days? No apology, no explanation, just casual urgency like nothing had happened. I didn't reply, not right away. I stared at it for half an hour, rereading every word, trying to figure out which part was supposed to convince me. I walked outside and stood in the driveway, watching the moonlight bounce off the broken tiles I hadn't replaced. I thought about the last time she called me. It was last year, when she needed help editing a grant proposal. She never said thank you, never followed up to tell me if she got it. I thought about saying no, but something else came out. One night, I texted back, "Don't touch anything." She arrived the next morning in a cream-colored coat and oversized sunglasses, dragging a suitcase that didn't look like it had ever seen dust. Her tone was chipper, performative. "Wow, this place has character," she said, stepping over a loose floorboard like it might bite her. "Very rustic." I offered her the only clean blanket I had and pointed to the futon. She looked at it like I'd offered a pile of rocks. "Thanks, sis, you've always had a generous heart." That night, I heard her whispering into her phone in the kitchen. Her voice was soft, but the tone was unmistakable. She was filming. I didn't interrupt. I waited until morning, when I entered the kitchen. My worn mug had been pushed aside, replaced by a curated set of granola bars, candles, and a fake bouquet. The ring light sat on the counter. Camilla turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Morning, just doing a quick live, nothing major." I didn't respond. I poured coffee and watched as she panned the phone across my chipped counters and mismatched chairs. She didn't say my name, but she said everything else. Sometimes people need a safe space, somewhere to heal, even if it's rough. It's about the journey. Then she angled the camera to show the peeling paint behind her. "This isn't luxury. This is transformation." I turned away before she could frame my silence as agreement. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. But I felt the first flash of something sharp. It wasn't rage. It was recognition, the kind that doesn't shout, but quietly takes note. Because in that moment, I knew she hadn't come for shelter. She came for content. By the time I finished my second cup of coffee, Camilla had already gone live 3 times. I didn't need to watch it to know what she was doing. I could feel it in the way she repositioned furniture that wasn't hers, the way she framed broken things like they were aesthetic, intentional. I opened Instagram and saw a still from her stream already circulating. She stood in my kitchen like a lifestyle coach on a mission trip, head tilted in sympathy, palm flat on the counter I had just sanded last week. The caption read, "Sometimes we meet people right where they're breaking and help them rebuild." She didn't tag me. She didn't have to. Her followers flooded the comments with praise. One wrote, "You're such a light. Most people would have just looked away." Another said, "I donated. I hope she finds her worth again." I stared at the screen, the irony curling like smoke in my throat. The kitchen wasn't a metaphor. It was where I'd burned my hand on a cracked burner 3 nights ago, trying to make soup from leftovers. That curtain she had pulled open for natural light was one I found in a thrift bin for $2. There was nothing romantic about this space, but in her hands it became content edited, softened, just tragic enough to feel hopeful. Later that day, I stepped out to get the mail. A neighbor I'd never spoken to before waved at me with that awkward kindness reserved for people you've just pitied online. I nodded once and turned away, pretending I hadn't seen the hesitation in her smile. Inside the mailbox was an envelope with no return address. The handwriting was unfamiliar. I opened it slowly, unsure of what to expect. Inside was a printed screenshot of a GoFundMe page. The title read, "Help my sister reclaim her dignity." The banner image was of me, hair pulled back, sweat on my forehead, taken from the exact moment I dragged a trash bag out to the curb last week. I hadn't known she was filming. I scanned the text. The words weren't cruel on the surface. In fact, they sounded almost poetic. She's been through so much. It read, "A brilliant mind dimmed by hardship. Let's lift her up." But every sentence dripped with dishonesty. Not because the facts were false, but because the framing was. Camilla had turned my life into a cause. And more than that, she had monetized it. At the bottom was the withdrawal detail recipient, Camilla Rivera, linked to a business PayPal. Over $16,000 had already been raised. I didn't scream. I didn't call her out. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the screen like it might blink and undo itself. I thought about all the times I'd made excuses for her, growing up. I said she was just young, in college. I said she was finding herself. Later, I said she meant well. But looking at that page, I realized she never had to mean anything. She just had to present the version of me that served her narrative. My phone buzzed with another notification, a message request from someone I didn't know. Hey, it read, "Did you authorize that fundraiser? I'm a paralegal." This could qualify as civil exploitation, possibly fraud depending on the structure. Want to talk receipts? I blinked twice. The name under the message was Sage L. Chapman. No emojis, no signature, just quiet clarity. I replied with one word, yes. Within the hour, we were on a call. Her voice was steady, practiced. She asked for screenshots, timestamps, any video I could pull down from cache stories. I gathered everything in silence, hands moving faster than my thoughts. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt surgical. Sage warned me not to confront Camilla directly. Not yet. Let her keep talking. She said, the more she performs, the more we collect. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by documents, emails, and saved stories, building a timeline like a case file. Camilla wandered in once around midnight, yawning, saying something about moon energy and needing to realign. I nodded and said nothing. She didn't notice the way I minimized the tabs on my laptop. She didn't ask why I was still awake. She never did. The next morning, she left for a spa appointment, eyeliner perfectly winged, hair curled as if struggle had never touched her. When the door shut behind her, I clicked into the fundraiser again. There was a new update, gratitude post. It read, "Because of your generosity, we've been able to start repairs and create a sacred space for healing." Below it was a photo of my backyard, the half-dug trench where I'd been trying to fix the drainage line. Camilla stood at the edge of the frame barefoot, palms together, eyes closed like she was meditating. I forwarded the image to Sage. 1 minute later, she replied, "This will help. You're doing great. Keep breathing." I stared at those words. They weren't dramatic. They weren't full of rage. But they were exactly what I needed, because someone saw it. Not the mess, not the makeover, and that meant something was finally shifting. The day before Camilla's big live event, the house was strangely quiet. She had gone out early, claiming she had a few meetings with collaborators and a photo shoot downtown. I didn't ask for details. I didn't even look up from the laptop when she left. I had work to do. On the screen in front of me were folders named by date, each packed with screenshots, recorded videos, and logs. The email thread with Sage was now over 30 messages deep, each one carefully documenting every false claim, every fund misuse, every photo taken without consent. It was no longer just a sibling betrayal. It was a pattern, and the more I saw it clearly, the less afraid I felt. Sage had helped me finalize a cease and desist letter that morning. I signed it digitally and watched the cursor blink at the bottom of the screen, steady and patient. A courier would deliver it to Camilla live, in the middle of her broadcast. Timing was everything. She wants an audience. Sage had said, "We'll give her one, but on your terms." The words echoed in my head long after the call ended. At noon, I walked out back and sat on the step where the sun hit just right. The air was still crisp, the kind of late winter wind that bit at your fingertips but made your lungs feel clean. I held a mug of coffee and let it warm my palms. There was no adrenaline, no rage, not even nerves, just a deep, anchoring calm I hadn't known I was capable of. It felt almost foreign to sit in stillness without waiting for the other shoe to drop. Camilla returned mid-afternoon, loud as ever. She clattered through the hallway with her tote bags and ring lights, speaking to someone on Bluetooth about color grading and brand tone. I stayed out of the way, letting her build her stage. She never noticed the thin yellow envelope tucked into the front pocket of her canvas bag, placed there by the courier 20 minutes before she came home. That night, I curled up on the secondhand couch, phone in hand, and pulled up her live countdown. Callista Collective presents Healing Through Chaos, a family rebirth. The screen shimmered in soft amber tones, and piano music played in the background. I almost laughed. She had always been good at packaging pain as poetry, especially when it wasn't hers. When the stream began, Camilla looked ethereal, draped in muted sage green, barefoot on a woven mat. She welcomed her audience with open palms and a practiced smile. Tonight is about truth, she said, about the messy middle where love and wounds coexist. Her voice was smooth, inviting, calculated. I listened without blinking. I wanted to remember every beat. 15 minutes in, just as she was answering a question about familial trust, a woman in a headset entered the frame hesitantly, holding the envelope. Camilla glanced sideways, lips still forming the word sacred, before freezing entirely. The chat exploded. What's that? Is she okay? OMG, why'd she stop? She took the envelope and opened it slowly, her fingers suddenly unsure. I could see the moment her brain caught up. Her smile faltered. Eyes flicked back and forth across the lines of legal text. Her jaw stiffened. She whispered something off mic, then turned away from the camera as if forgetting she was live. The stream cut out abruptly. No sign-off, no graceful ending, just static. I leaned back into the couch and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I didn't cheer. I didn't text anyone. I just sat there, letting the silence speak. 10 minutes later, my phone lit up with screenshots from viewers. Reddit threads had already begun. Callista served midstream. One post read, "She got legally bodied live." Another captioned her frozen frame with, "Healing through lawsuits." There were hashtags trending, #Callista exposed, #sister scam, #cease and assist. I didn't start any of it. I didn't even share it. The internet simply did what it always does when someone lies too confidently for too long. That same night, I received a message from the HOA, short and direct. We were unaware Callista Rivera was using the Skyline Estates name for donation solicitations. This misrepresentation violates community ethics and will be reviewed immediately. We'd like your cooperation. Attached were PDF files. In one, Camilla had listed me as a displaced family member seeking emergency housing. In another, she included photos of my broken porch and basement leak as evidence of crisis, tagging her brand as the intervention, my name, my life, framed like I was an abandoned pet waiting to be rescued. I didn't rage. I didn't shake. I just read each line slowly, like I was proofreading someone else's fiction, because that's what it was. A story she had written about me without ever asking if I wanted to be part of it. Camilla didn't come home that night. The futon remained perfectly folded. the blanket undisturbed. I didn't ask where she went. I didn't need to. Her silence was louder than usual, not sulking or performative like before, but shaken, uncertain, by morning. Her brand's Instagram had turned off comments. The last post, a soft photo of her holding a journal by a window, was flooded with screenshots, questions, and blunt accusations. I scrolled through them without expression. One person wrote, "You profited off your sister's struggle." Another simply said, "Disgusted, but not surprised." Around noon, I opened my laptop and checked the inbox I'd created for documentation. A message had come in from a journalist at an independent media blog. They were compiling a story about misused crowdfunding campaigns and had been pointed in my direction. I didn't respond right away. I stared at the screen and tried to remember when I became part of a bigger conversation, when my private hurt became something that echoed. I wasn't sure I wanted visibility, not like this, but I was sure of one thing. I wanted the record set straight. That afternoon, I walked out into the backyard and began clearing the last pile of construction debris near the fence. I didn't do it for aesthetic. I did it because the mess no longer felt symbolic. It just felt like trash. My neighbor, a retired welder named Earl, wandered over with a cold soda and a quiet nod. He didn't mention the live stream or the fundraiser or the cease and desist. He just said, "You're building something real here." I looked at him for a second and felt something shift. Respect, not pity, earned, not performed. That evening, I received a call from Aunt Paulina. We hadn't spoken in over a year. Her voice was raspy and warm, the kind of tired that doesn't come from age, but from years of biting your tongue. She said she'd seen the videos, that someone from her church forwarded the Reddit thread and asked, "Isn't this your niece?" She paused for a long time before saying the thing I didn't know I needed to hear. "You weren't crazy. You were just inconvenient." I didn't cry. I just let the words sit there between us like a stitched wound that finally got air. By the end of the week, Camilla's sponsors had begun to pull out, one by one. Companies that once reposted her affirmations and detox recipes quietly removed her tags. An open letter circulated from a nonprofit claiming she had exaggerated her impact work and inflated metrics. Screenshots surfaced of her messaging assistants to edit captions, crop out logos, and fabricate before and after photos. None of this surprised me. What surprised me was how quickly the curtain dropped when no one clapped anymore. I stayed out of it publicly. I didn't post. I didn't comment. I let the noise unfold without trying to control it. The only action I took was signing a document Sage had prepared, an official statement disavowing the fundraiser, the photos, the false claims. She sent it to every organization Camilla had cited as a partner. She didn't embellish. She didn't accuse, just facts, presented plainly, like a mirror held up to a face that no longer recognized itself. The morning of the charity gala arrived clear and cold. I stood at the mirror and smoothed the front of my navy dress. It wasn't expensive. It didn't shimmer, but it fit. Around my neck was a silver locket my mother once called flea market junk. I had kept it in a drawer for years. That night, I wore it like armor. The event took place in downtown Los Angeles, inside a marble ballroom lit by soft chandeliers. People moved through the space like they were posing for a magazine cover, all perfect posture and effortless charm. I stayed near the back, unnoticed, which was exactly what I wanted. Camilla stood center stage beneath a floral archway, smiling like nothing had happened. She greeted fans and funders with the same breathy enthusiasm I remembered from childhood, the one she used when she wanted to be seen as delicate, spiritual, misunderstood. When the slideshow began, I already knew what was coming. Polished graphics, soothing music, testimonials from unnamed sisters who healed. The audience clapped politely. Then the screen flickered. For a second, I thought it was a glitch. Then a text message appeared in massive, bold letters. Let her rot in that dump. Cry for me, baby. Another slide followed. She's good for sympathy points. Keep the cameras low. Show the cracks. The room froze. Camilla turned towards the screen, eyes wide, her mouth open but no words came out. A few people gasped. Others pulled out phones. The host tried to smooth it over, but it was too late. The mask had slipped, and this time, no one reached to put it back on for her. Camilla tried to recover. She laughed, soft and breathy, the way she always did when she was cornered in public but hadn't rehearsed an escape. Looks like someone's having fun with the tech, she said, eyes darting toward the AV booth as if willing someone to shut it down. But no one moved. On the screen behind her, another slide appeared, this time a screenshot of the fundraiser's withdrawal records, her business PayPal, her signature, a total raised, a total claimed. The numbers didn't lie, and neither did the silence in the room. Somewhere near the front row, I saw someone lower their glass slowly, eyebrows lifted, a couple whispered behind their hands. The rustle of confusion spread through the crowd like water under cracked floorboards. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I sat still in the back corner with my hands in my lap, feeling the quiet power of something I hadn't known. I'd waited for accountability, not vengeance, just the truth, finally louder than the performance. And then, something I never expected. Aunt Paulina stood from her seat near the stage, not rushed, not angry, just steady, like she'd been holding this weight for years. The room quieted again. Camilla stepped aside instinctively, unsure whether it was strategy or fear. Aunt Paulina walked to the center of the stage, past the microphone resting on its stand, and faced the audience without notes. Her voice was low, worn, but unwavering. I was invited to speak tonight, she said, about resilience and rebuilding, about what it means to rise above pain. But I've watched this family for too long, praise the child who performs healing, and forget the one who had to survive without applause. There was no outrage in her tone, just exhaustion. Finally spoken aloud, she glanced briefly in my direction, then back at the room, the sister you've seen behind the camera. She said, is not broken, she's not fragile, she's not lost. She was erased, and she chose to start over anyway, for a moment. There was nothing but the sound of air conditioning humming behind chandeliers. Then Aunt Paulina stepped down, walked across the room without waiting for permission, and wrapped me in the kind of hug that felt like something being returned, a seat at a table that had once refused me. The moment didn't go viral. There were no trending hashtags that day, no headlines in digital magazines. But for everyone in that room, something changed. Camilla left without a speech. Her exit wasn't dramatic, just quiet, heels clicking against marble as people stepped out of her way. And I didn't chase her. I didn't even watch her go. I stayed seated while Aunt Paulina held onto my arm like she was anchoring us both. When I returned to Flagstaff, the house looked exactly as I'd left it. The porch still leaned slightly to the left. The yard still needed gravel. But I saw it differently, not like a project, like a place I chose. I opened the door, stepped inside, and the silence no longer felt like something missing. It felt earned. 2 weeks passed. Sponsors continued to distance themselves from Camilla's brand. A statement from her account blamed a former team member for mismanagement. She tried pivoting toward a rest and renewal series, but the comments never recovered. People remembered. That mattered more than I expected. Then, one morning, while I was repainting the hallway trim, my phone buzzed. A message from Camilla. Short. Too short. Things have been rough. Any chance I could stay with you for a bit while I sort things out? No apology, no reflection, just another request dressed in assumption. I stared at the words for a long time, not because they shocked me, but because they didn't. I placed the phone on the windowsill and looked around. The light cut across the floor in soft angles. A pile of books sat on the coffee table. The same quilt from my college days rested neatly on the couch. My space, not curated, not explained, just lived. I didn't fume. I didn't draft a long reply. I typed 7 words and pressed send. There's no space for lies here anymore. Then I set the phone down and went back to painting, because some messages don't need punctuation. They just need to be clear. The message sat unread in my sent folder for hours. Camilla didn't reply. Maybe she didn't know how. Maybe she didn't expect I would say no with such finality. I didn't wonder too long. I had groceries to put away, light bulbs to replace, and trim I still hadn't finished painting in the hallway. The rhythm of my days had returned, not quiet because of isolation, but because I had finally stopped explaining myself to people who never really asked. I spent the following weekend fixing the last drafty window in the back room. The air had started to warm just enough to make paint dry quicker and coffee go cold faster. I played a podcast while I worked, something about resilience after rupture. The host talked about how some stories don't end with applause or forgiveness. Some just end with space. I paused halfway through to write that sentence down on a sticky note and pressed it onto the fridge, beside a photo of my younger self, 11 years old, missing a front tooth, smiling at something just off camera. I stared at her face for a moment and whispered, "You're safe now." There was no dramatic transformation, no viral video of me rising from the ashes, just daily proof in small things. I finally bought a curtain rod that fit the frame properly. The first time I installed it, it stayed up. I repotted a dying aloe plant. And 2 weeks later, it grew new shoots. I received a handwritten letter from a student I mentored 5 years ago. She said she still remembered the way I used to underline her metaphors in green ink instead of red. She said it made her feel seen. Some nights, I sat out on the porch with a chipped mug of tea, watching the neighborhood shift slowly. Kids rode their bikes down the block. Someone started a small library box near the corner. Someone else planted lavender along the sidewalk. It was nothing like the curated images Camilla used to post no filters, no hashtags, no brand voice. But it was real. I had stopped measuring value by how many people approved. I started measuring by how much peace I felt waking up. The only time I thought about her anymore was when someone brought her up accidentally. A woman at the hardware store asked if I was related to that influencer who used to talk about retreat healing. I smiled and said, "We're distant now." She nodded, not prying, and offered to help me find the right drill bit. That was it. No judgment, no lingering gaze, just acknowledgement that sometimes people grow apart and don't need to perform the reasons why. About a month after the gala, I received an email from the HOA. It was formal, but the tone had changed. They commended my repairs and included an update on revised community standards. Turns out Camilla had submitted forms on my behalf without authorization. Those documents were now officially voided. They asked if I'd be willing to join the ethics review committee. I said yes, not because I wanted control, but because I knew what it felt like to have your name used without your knowledge. I wanted to make sure it didn't happen to anyone else. Spring bled into early summer. I painted the porch railings in a soft gray. I mixed myself with leftover sample cans. I hosted a community cleanup day and baked cinnamon muffins that didn't rise quite right, but still got eaten. A neighbor helped me install a used screen door. Another offered extra bricks from their backyard to edge my garden beds. We didn't exchange social handles or selfies. We just helped, and that was enough. Then, one afternoon, I opened my inbox to find another message from Camila. This time, longer. Carefully worded, it spoke of lessons learned, public pressure, and the loneliness of losing everything so fast. She didn't apologize directly. She didn't mention the money, just that she was thinking of taking some time off to realign. I stared at the words, felt the calculated softness, the curated regret. I didn't reply. I didn't feel angry, just tired. And maybe that was the most powerful shift of all, to feel nothing where pain used to live. I closed the laptop, stepped outside, and saw the first tulip pushing through the soil in the corner of the yard I thought was too dry for anything to grow. I bent down, brushed the dirt gently from its petals, and smiled, because even here, where people once pointed and whispered, something was blooming, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't need anyone else to witness it for it to be real. That summer passed slower than most, not because time dragged, but because I finally had the chance to feel every hour. I started waking up without an alarm. The birds outside the window did that job better anyway. I let my phone stay on silent most days. I didn't owe the world an update, and the world, surprisingly, didn't seem to miss one. That absence felt like a small kind of freedom unnoticed, unmeasured, unperformed. My mornings became ritual. I brewed coffee in the same old kettle, sat on the porch while the steam rose into the cool air, and made a list of 3 things I wanted to do that day. Not 5, not 10, just 3. Something about making the list feel achievable made it easier to keep going. Sometimes I planted seeds. Sometimes I scrubbed the grout in the hallway with a toothbrush. Sometimes I just sat and reread my old essays, not to judge them, but to remind myself that I had once believed in my own voice, long before someone decided I was too much or not enough depending on their needs. I started writing again, this time under no deadline. A small publication from the Pacific Northwest reached out after reading an op-ed I'd published anonymously. They asked if I'd consider a column monthly. Nothing fancy, just real stories, grounded in quiet truth. I didn't hesitate. I said yes, not because I needed validation, but because I wanted to leave behind a voice that hadn't been filtered through someone else's lens for the first time. I wrote without wondering who might misunderstand me. That in itself was more powerful than any applause. One afternoon, I ran into my neighbor Margot while buying mulch. She complimented the paint color on my porch and asked if I had considered teaching workshops, something about home restoration or writing for clarity. At first, I laughed. The idea felt absurd. Who would come? But she said, "You've already rebuilt something people gave up on. That's more valuable than theory." I went home that night and made a flyer on my laptop. Quiet rebuilds. A Saturday circle for stories and small repairs. The next weekend, 6 women showed up. One brought banana bread. Another cried the first 20 minutes without saying a word. No one tried to fix her. We just passed her the tea and kept going. That's what healing actually looked like. Not a retreat, a return. To self, to breathe, to silence without shame. Camilla never replied to my last message. I didn't expect her to. What could she say? The story she built had collapsed quietly, the way false structures do when they're no longer fed by attention. I heard rumors she moved out of state, possibly started something new under a different name. That didn't interest me. The version of me she tried to build content around no longer existed. I had dismantled it one truth at a time. Sometimes people still asked about her. A stranger at the grocery store once recognized me from the viral threads and said, "That was you, right?" The sister. I nodded once and said, "I'm Sophia." He blinked, unsure what to say next. Then he smiled softly and said, "Glad you're still here. I didn't know him." But the way he said it, I believed he meant it. By the end of July, the last of the original windows had been replaced. The house no longer groaned in the wind. It held steady. I repainted the door a dusty plum color I mixed myself. It wasn't trendy, but it made me smile every time I came home. That's all it needed to do. I didn't rebuild my life to prove anything. I didn't heal to win. I simply chose to keep going when it would have been easier to perform being okay. And somewhere along the way, that choice became a rhythm, a practice, a kind of faith in what was mine to hold. One morning, as the sun came through the window at just the right angle, I looked around the room and realized something simple and quiet and true. I wasn't waiting anymore, not for their call, not for her apology, not for the world to see me differently. I had stopped knocking on closed doors. I had stopped asking to be understood by people who only spoke when it served their image. What I had now didn't need permission. It just needed presence. One of the quietest days that summer became the one I remember most. It was a Wednesday, late afternoon, the kind of golden hour that slips through the trees like a secret. I had just finished weeding the garden beds and was about to head inside when I saw a girl riding her bike too fast down the sidewalk. She hit a loose pebble and went down hard. I didn't rush. I walked over calmly, crouched beside her as she tried not to cry, and said, "Scrapes sting most when we pretend they don't." Her eyes filled instantly. I helped her sit up, cleaned the cut with water from my gardening can, and gave her one of the backup bandages I kept in my coat pocket. She said thanks and rode off a few minutes later, slower this time. She didn't ask for my name. She didn't need to. That night, I sat on my porch with the lights off and let the air wrap around me like something earned. I thought about how many times I had craved witnesses, applause, proof that I mattered, and how now. The smallest moments, the ones no one saw, were the ones that felt most real. When I'd first bought this house, it felt like a punishment. Now it felt like a practice, a quiet, daily vow to live in integrity, even when no one was watching. I still remembered the old version of me, the one who stayed silent at dinners while Camilla's projects were celebrated like revolutions, the one who brought homemade gifts to birthdays that were barely opened, the one who gave and gave hoping someone would say, "We see you." But something had changed, not all at once, but gradually, like light filling a room you didn't know was dark. I no longer needed to be seen in someone else's frame. I no longer mistook visibility for love. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten, no return address. The script was familiar, neat but performative. I opened it carefully, knowing before I read it who it was from. Camilla. The words were controlled, curated for balance. "I've been doing a lot of reflection," she wrote. "It's been a hard lesson, but I'm learning. I want to believe we can still repair something." She didn't say sorry. She didn't name what she had done, but the tone was softer, less arrogant, There was no ask, no pitch, just a vague suggestion of reconnection. I read it once, then again. I folded it back into the envelope and placed it in the drawer beneath my tea towels. I didn't answer, not because I hated her, but because I had learned the difference between forgiveness and access. I could wish her well without letting her back in. I could grieve the sister I wanted without pretending the one I had wouldn't do it again if no one was watching. That boundary wasn't bitterness. It was wisdom earned through too many seasons of giving people the benefit of the doubt when what they needed was the consequence of their choices. Later that evening, I stood in the hallway, staring at the mirror I'd finally mounted after months of delay. My reflection looked calm, not glamorous, not curated, just grounded. I wore the same gray t-shirt I'd painted ceilings in. My hair was pulled back messily. There was dirt beneath my fingernails. But my posture had changed. Shoulders relaxed, jaw unclenched, eyes open, not guarded. I touched the edge of the frame and whispered, "This is who I've been becoming." The next morning, I hosted another quiet rebuild circle. A woman in her late 50s shared that her daughter hadn't spoken to her in 4 years. Another, barely 22, said her own mother hadn't remembered her birthday since she was 16. No one interrupted. No one offered empty affirmations. We just listened. At the end, someone said, "I thought I was the only one living in the after." I wrote that down in the corner of my notebook because that's what this was. Life after the unraveling, not polished, not perfect, but real. I walked home slowly, hands in my pockets, letting the wind carry the weight of everyone's truth. I no longer carried it alone, and I no longer needed to carry theirs for them. I had enough tending to do right here. The foundation of this house still creaked on cold nights. The plumbing was temperamental. The hallway light flickered every now and then, but none of it felt broken anymore, just lived in, like me. And I had stopped apologizing for both. It was nearly a year to the day since I moved into the junk house no one believed in. The windows were no longer boarded. The walls had been repainted in soft earth tones. The garden out front bloomed with stubborn resilience dahlias, sage, creeping rosemary. I had replaced the rusted mailbox, sealed the roof, and even rewired the bedroom lights after watching 6 different tutorials. But what changed most wasn't the house. It was the way I stood inside it. That morning, I made coffee like always, letting the kettle whistle longer than necessary. There was something peaceful in not rushing, outside. The light came in at an angle that reminded me of the first time I pulled into this driveway. Unsure if I'd made a mistake, I had no idea then that the ugliest house on the street would become the most honest version of my life. One where I no longer needed to be chosen, forgiven, or invited back. One where I chose myself. I stepped outside to check the mail. A flyer from the co-op, a letter from a reader who had followed my columns and wanted to share her story. And at the bottom of the pile, a small white envelope. I recognized the handwriting before I turned it over. My mother's. The ink was lighter now, like her certainty had faded. I opened it slowly. There were only 3 sentences inside. "We heard about your porch garden. Camilla said it's lovely. Your father and I were thinking of coming by." No date, no emotion, just the implication that they expected the door to still be open. I folded the paper neatly and set it on the side table. I didn't feel shaken or torn. I didn't feel anything close to anger. I just felt done. because what they were asking for wasn't a reunion. It was a return to a dynamic I had already outgrown. People always say forgiveness is for the forgiver, that it sets you free. But I learned something different. Sometimes real freedom isn't in forgiving or forgetting. It's in no longer explaining your peace to people who mistake your silence for surrender. I didn't leave my family. I left the version of myself they required in order to keep loving me. And once I stepped outside of that shape, I realized it had never fit. That afternoon, I hosted one last quiet rebuild circle before the season changed. We sat in the backyard under a canvas canopy, sipping lavender tea while a light breeze moved through the trees. One woman read a poem she had written after 15 years in silence. Another talked about choosing not to return to a holiday dinner for the first time in her adult life. No one judged, no one fixed. We just held space. That was all any of us really needed. As dusk settled, a girl from down the street passed by on her bike and waved. Her knee was fully healed now. I waved back, smiling without hesitation. The wind carried the smell of basil and earth. My home smelled like effort and honesty. It had taken everything I didn't know I still had, but it was mine now, not the structure, the life. Later that evening, I sat on the porch in the dark, letting the quiet fill every corner of me. The same house I was once shamed for buying had become the place where I remembered how to breathe. The same person they erased had become the one people now sought out to ask, "How did you survive that?" And the truth was simple. I stopped needing to survive it. I started living beyond it. My phone buzzed once, a message from someone I didn't recognize. I read what you wrote about boundaries. It made me feel less alone. I stared at that line for a while, not because it validated me, but because it mirrored what I had always needed and never received. Not praise, just presence. Just someone saying, "You're not wrong for wanting peace." I didn't reply right away. I let it sit, like sunlight on skin that used to flinch from warmth. And then I typed the only thing that felt honest. Me too. I used to think it was just me. I hit send, closed the phone, and leaned back into the creaking chair that had carried me through every season of doubt. It didn't matter if they came knocking. It didn't matter if they brought apologies wrapped in politeness or guilt disguised as nostalgia. I had already built my own door, and I had learned how to lock it, open it, or close it on my terms. Sometimes the hardest home to build is the one inside yourself, but once you do, no one can evict you from it again. What about you? Have you ever had to build a life from scratch after being erased by the people closest to you? Tell me how you found your peace.